Master croupier Leo Vance committed a perfect crime 20 years ago, a crime no one could see. This was not a noisy crime of exploding vaults, ringing alarms, or pursuing police. This was a work of art, committed with absolute silence and elegance in plain sight, at the heart of a casino, on the velvet-covered tables where millions of dollars in chips changed hands, in a room thick with the smoke of whiskey and cigars. His crime was not in demolishing steel walls or blinding cameras. His crime was hidden in the blind spots of human perception, in the weakest moments of chance and probability. His crime was written with almost atomic precision, in microscopic markings thinner than a human hair, inside a deck of playing cards, visible only with a specially designed contact lens. For 20 years, that crime, that secret, that perfect cheat, waited like a deck of cards in the dusty cellar of time. But now, that deck had been found, and Leo Vance's magnificent 20-year bluff was about to be called by the most ruthless, most vengeful player from the past. Leo Vance's current life was a controlled whisper, cleansed of the magnificent chaos of his past. He was in his late 60s. His hair had turned gray, and the lines on his face told the story of thousands of hands and thousands of people he had read at poker tables over thousands of nights. He ran a small, private poker club, accessible only to members, on a nameless side street, far from the city center. The name of the place was The Balance. This was a reflection of his new life philosophy. The interior resembled an old-school jazz club. Dim lighting, the smell of leather armchairs and quality wood, the clinking of whiskey glasses, and most importantly, that rhythmic, hypnotic sound of poker chips. This was Leo's sanctuary. And this sanctuary had only one sacred rule. The game was always played honestly. He was no longer a player. He was the guardian of the game. Every night he would glide between the tables like a shadow, watching the dealing of the cards, the players' bets, the slightest mimicry, the smallest hesitation. His eyes were as sharp as a bird of praise. Over the years, he had exposed hundreds of cheaters with a single word, a single glance, at the moment they felt most secure. That night, too, at one of the tables, he noticed a young, confident businessman trying to mark the cards. It was an amateurish trick. Leo stood silently behind the man. He waited for the game to end. When the man won that hand, Leo leaned forward and whispered, "Sir, you may keep your winnings, but your time at this table is over. And if you ever try to enter this door again, I will make sure your fingers will never be able to hold a card again." The man's face turned white, first with anger and then with fear, when he saw that cold, steely expression in Leo's eyes. Without a word, he collected his chips and left the premises. For Leo, this was not just enforcing a rule. It was a kind of penance. He paid for the sins of his own past. He was once the greatest sinner of the game. Now he was its most faithful priest. When he went to the back office of the club, he heard his phone ringing. On the screen, a name he hadn't seen in 20 years was flashing. Sully. Sully was an old man from the old days, from that dangerous life, who was now trying to survive by dealing in small casinos. Leo hesitantly answered the phone. "Leo?" Sully's voice said in a panicked whisper. "There's a big problem. The Palace. They bought it." Leo's heart skipped a beat. The Palace. 20 years ago, the magnificent, seemingly untouchable casino run by one of the most powerful families of the Italian mafia, the Bianchis, the stage where Leo had committed his perfect crime. "Who bought it?" Leo asked, his voice calm. "The son," Sully said. "The old boss's son, Marco Bianchi. They say he's smarter, more ruthless than his father. And they found something, Leo. During the renovation, they opened a sealed old warehouse. Inside there was a single unopened deck of cards from that time. One of your special decks." Leo hung up the phone. His hands were not trembling. He never panicked. But in his mind, the walls of a 20-year-old dam were beginning to crack. Those decks. He thought he and his partner had burned them all after that operation. But apparently, one of them like a ghost, had been waiting for him in the darkness of that warehouse for 20 years. He had to prepare to disappear. A new identity, a new city. But before he could even take that first step, the news bulletin on the television changed everything. Marco Bianchi was in his father's old ostentatious office in front of the cameras. Unlike his father, he did not look like an old-school mafia boss, but like a CEO from Silicon Valley. An expensive, modern suit, a confident posture. While everyone was expecting a magnificent announcement about the reopening of the palace, Marco surprised everyone. "Today," he said, "I will present to you not a new casino, but an old secret." On the giant screen behind him, a magnified image of a playing card, an ace of spades, appeared. And in that magnified image, those microscopic markings, those complex patterns that would normally never be seen, were clearly visible. "This," Marco said, "is the evidence of a cheat that bankrupted my father's casino 20 years ago. This is a work of art, a masterpiece, and I am looking for the artist who created this masterpiece. I am offering him a $1 million reward in return for just telling me how he did this cheat." This was not a reward offer. This was a coded death warrant sent to Leo Vance. And at the same time, it was a bloody invitation for anyone from Leo's dark past who needed money to betray him. Leo's quiet life ended in that moment. The poker club was no longer a sanctuary, but a target. He had been forcibly dragged back after 20 years into the ruthless criminal world he had tried to escape. He knew that just running away would be useless. Marco was a new generation crime lord. He used technology, data, money like a hunter. He would find him wherever he went in the world. He had to confront the problem head on. But first, he had to make sure he was not alone in this war. He had not designed this perfect cheat alone. He had a partner. Arthur, the genius optical engineer who had created the technology to print those microscopic markings and produce those special contact lenses. Finding Arthur was as hard as finding a ghost. 20 years ago, after the operation, they had agreed to take their shares and disappear forever. But Leo was a man who always thought one step ahead. They had established a coded communication method with Arthur to be used only in emergencies. That night, using that method, Leo left a message for Arthur with a seemingly meaningless move in the deepest depths of a chess forum. The next day, the answer came. A meeting address. Leo found Arthur in an abandoned observatory outside the city. Arthur was no longer that confident, brilliant engineer. He had turned into a paranoid man living in fear. He had seen Marco's press conference. "They're going to find us, Leo," he whispered. "It's all over." Leo tried to calm him down. He asked him if they had a trump card, if there was a weakness in that old system that Marco didn't know about. And Arthur revealed that weakness. "The lenses," he said. "The lenses were prototypes. Over time, in 20 years, the special polymer inside them reacts chemically with the user's retina. This leaves a unique chemical trace, invisible to the naked eye, but detectable with a modern medical scanner. If Marco finds the player who did the cheat and has his eyes scanned, he can prove that that player was one of ours." That player, the third man who had personally applied the cheat at the table, who had worn those lenses, he was the only living witness, and Marco was now looking for him. At the same time, Marco's $1 million reward offer had activated the sewer rats at the bottom of the underworld. All the men whom Leo owed, who held a grudge against him, were now on his trail for that $1 million. Leo had suddenly found himself having to escape from both Marco's modern technological hunters and the old, primitive ghosts of the past. And one of those ghosts found him. Marco's team had tracked down Arthur and captured him, but they didn't kill him. They used him as bait.
Marco forced Arthur to arrange a meeting with Leo. He knew it was a trap, but he could not leave his partner to die. He went to the meeting place, and the meeting place had been specially chosen by Marco, the very center of the now gutted, under-renovated, haunted main floor of that crime scene from 20 years ago, the Palace Casino.
When Leo entered, he found Marco sitting alone at a single poker table. They were surrounded by at least 20 armed men, and Arthur was in a corner, tied to a chair, looking at them in fear. "Welcome, Leo," Marco said. His voice was different from his father's coarse, gravelly voice. It was cold, educated, and dangerously calm. "I have been waiting for this moment for 20 years. Marco didn't just want to kill him. He wanted to symbolically defeat him, to humiliate him at the table where his father had been defeated. He proposed one last game, a single hand of poker, Texas Hold'em. If Leo won, he and his partner would walk away. If Marco won, they would both die there. And the cards they would use were a brand new, digitally scanned, hologram-sealed, completely clean deck specially brought in by Marco. Leo looked at the armed men around him, at his helpless partner, and at Marco's icy eyes. He had no other choice. He accepted the game. The stage was set. 2 generations, 2 worlds had come face to face at a single table on the vast, empty, and haunted casino floor. Leo knew he could not win with a cheat. The deck was clean. Marco would be watching his every muscle, his every breath. His only chance was to win with pure skill, with psychology. This game was no longer just about cards. It was a battle of wills, an autopsy of his opponent's soul. He had to read not just the cards, but Marco, that heir who was desperately struggling to prove himself in the shadow of his father. The cards were dealt silently. The game progressed slowly and tensely. Both men were sizing each other up, testing each other with small bets. Finally, the last card, the river card, was also dealt. On the table, there was a combination that could potentially make both men win. It was clear that Marco had a strong hand. A confident smile appeared on his face, and then he made his move. "All in," he said. He pushed not only all the chips on the table, but also a single shiny bullet he took out of his pocket to the center of the table. It was a symbolic bet. To call this bet, Leo had to put his own life on the table. Leo paused for a moment. He looked at his cards. He had a good but not an unbeatable hand. The chance of winning was 50%. A gamble. The biggest gamble of his life. But he was not just looking at the cards. He was looking at Marco. And with his decades-long supernatural ability to read people, he saw something in Marco's eyes, behind that confident smile. A tiny spark of doubt. A momentary hesitation. A hint of overcompensation. Marco was bluffing, or at least he was not as confident as he appeared. His desire to avenge his father in such a dramatic, such a cinematic way had gotten ahead of his logic. Leo made his decision. He called the bluff, but not just with his chips. He calmly leaned back. "I see you, Marco," he said, his voice a whisper, but that whisper was sharper than the sound of all the guns in the room. And then he began to explain to him, to everyone at the table, why Marco was bluffing. His insecurities about his father, how afraid he was of being a crude man like him, which is why he had planned such a spectacular revenge plan to prove how smart and modern he was. He laid everything out, one by one, like a therapist, like a surgeon. "You don't want to win this hand, Marco. You want to win the respect that your father could never win. But respect is not won like this." Marco, whose psychological armor had been pierced with words, lost that cold, controlled mask of his. In anger, he threw his cards on the table. His bluff was exposed. Leo's hand was better than his. Leo had won. Marco, shocked and humiliated, was left frozen at the table.
He had lost the grand game, the revenge scene he had set up. Leo, after winning, did not gloat. He just slowly stood up. He untied his partner, and before walking towards the door, he turned to Marco one last time. "Your father's casino," he said, "did not go bankrupt because of my cheat. It went bankrupt because he was a tyrant who inspired not loyalty, but only fear. That's why a man like me could so easily destroy his empire." Leo told Marco that he had a choice: to be a man ruled by violence, by fear like his father, or to be his own man, who could accept a loss and move on. Leo, having paid his debt, quietly left that casino, that past. Months later, Leo was again in that small, quiet poker club. The table was surrounded by his friends. The game was friendly. The stakes were low. A young, talented player at the table made a risky but brilliant bluff and won the hand. Everyone at the table, including Leo, laughed with laughter. Leo looked at that honest game, that friendship, that beauty of that simple moment, and on his face, for the first time in years, a small, sincere, genuine smile appeared. He had finally found an honest game worth playing. Behind every genius lies a secret, sometimes the source of that genius, and sometimes a threat to destroy it. We will continue to uncover the untold stories and files of those who, like Leo Vance, built new lives to escape the echoes of their past, or of those who were crushed under those echoes. To not miss the secrets of these stolen pasts, don't forget to subscribe to Stolen Past Stories, until we open another secret file to explore another veil of secrecy.